Okay, so instead of, and we're going to look at the side that I have made up as well, but I'm going to play the last part of this video that you guys have already watched and took your notes on. Okay, so this is all going to look familiar. I was studying a little bit, preparing for this, and it's like, you know, he explains it much better than I would, and I just sort of regurgitate it. So we'll watch this last part of the video because it's so important. But one thing to keep in mind on the picture that really confused me for a while is this is the inside of the vessel.
You didn't know that?
Yeah. Did that confuse you guys?
No.
Okay, well, I'm easily confused then, okay.
Yeah.
It confused me for a little bit. This is the inside of the vessel, so I thought I'd bring it up. Well, go ahead, Plaque. So, Atherosclerosis. So we'll go ahead and play that. We'll watch this last part, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
So let's talk about the pathophysiology, what's going on here. So here I have a vessel wall, and this is a muscular artery. It's got a lot of smooth muscle in the tunica media. And we have out here the tunica adventitia, and here on the inside we have the tunica intima, and with sort of an exaggerated drawing of the endothelial cells in the tunica intima. Now, what's interesting here is this whole process starts out, and this primarily involves the tunica intima, particularly in the beginning. And what happens is we have damage to the tunica intima. So the first thing that happens is damage to the tunica intima. So what can damage tunica intima? What can damage it? Well, one thing is smoking. And, you know, another thing is diabetes, hypertension, so high blood pressure. So what happens is we end up with injury to one of these endothelial cells, and maybe sort of we've got some shearing forces from high blood pressure, and actually one of the cells could actually completely die, or maybe, you know, it's sort of pulled away from the endothelial wall. So we've got this little space here. Now, when an endothelial cell is damaged, it releases a chemical called von Willebrand Factor. And we're going to talk about von Willebrand Factor significantly in our next week's session when we're talking about the hematologic system, because it figures very prominently in coagulation. So I'll just give you a little introduction to it now. One of the ways that von Willebrand Factor can be released is by endothelial cells when they are injured. And so what happens is we've got von Willebrand Factor that's expressed by this endothelial cell, and these von Willebrand factors sort of acts like hooks. And what it hooks is platelets. So it connects and binds with platelets. So we end up with a platelet plug. Now, one of the things that you're going to learn when we talk about the coagulation process in depth is that there's close linkages between the coagulation cascade and the inflammatory cascade. So just the fact that we have platelet activation and platelet plug formation because of von Willebrand factor, we are going to start inflammation. So what's inflammation do? Well, you know, it causes vasodilation and increased blood flow and capillary leak, but it also calls white blood cells to the area. And one of the white blood cells that comes trundling over to the area are macrophages. So we got macrophages coming to the area. Okay, now, so that's one thing, that we're starting the process of inflammation already. Now, another thing that can happen is we've got little HDLs, and actually it's LDLs that we're worried about. We have little LDLs floating around in the bloodstream. And the LDLs, because there's an opening in the endothelial cells, can get in below the basement membrane of the Tunica Intima and sort of lodge there, start to collect there. And HDLs are also cause inflammation. So we've got two things causing inflammation now: the platelet plug formation and the LDLs. Actually, I keep calling it HDLs, excuse me. It is the low density lipoproteins that we are concerned about. Okay, so this is sort of the first phase here, where we have the initial injury to endothelium and the beginning of inflammation, and the beginning of deposition of low-density lipoproteins in the tunica intima, or below the tunica intima. Now, the second stage here is called fatty streak formation. And a fatty streak is due to continued LDL deposition below the tunica intima. And we still often have a platelet plug formation. And now we have lots and lots of macrophages that have sort of joined the party, and they're engulfing one by one the particles of LDL. And this generates the macrophages become so filled with LDLs that they become what are called foam cells. And foam cells are just these big distended macrophages that are filled with LDLs. Now, these aren't typically all that bad. I mean, they do continue to add to the inflammation, but they're not really, they're more of a sign of disease than they are the disease themselves. And so that's, so the process this process will continue as the inflammation gets worse, the LDLs continue to accumulate, and so you have this inflamed fatty streak here. Now, the end process of inflammation, we talked about this when we talked about the immune system, is the deposition of fibrin. So the third phase here is the development of a fibrous plaque. So what happens is all this inflammation causes the deposition of fibrin. So we end up with a fibrin cap trying to enclose this big inflamed area. Fibrous plaque. Okay, and oftentimes when the fibrous plaque is there, the bloodstream is sort of walled, this fatty streak is sort of walled off on the vessel, so you won't necessarily have, it'll sort of become an indolent process. Now, the inflammation is still going on very much underneath the surface, but it's not really interacting with the bloodstream anymore. So there's not necessarily any platelet aggregation or anything like that. However, this can continue to grow in size with more deposition of cholesterol and more inflammatory mediators. So it can continue to grow. Now, so this can continue to grow and encroach into the vessel. So, over the years, it's going to get bigger and bigger, and eventually it's going to completely occlude the vessel, or include the vessel enough at least so the patient starts to have symptoms. What kind of symptoms might they have? Well, depends on where the vein is, or where the artery is, I'm sorry. If it's peripheral vascular disease, and this process is occurring in the femoral artery, for instance, and this can happen in any artery in the body, then the patient might start to have claudication. That is pain in the lower extremities with activity, because when you're using your muscles and you're not able to supply the extra blood flow because the wall of the artery has been occluded so much, then you are going to have ischemia with activity, right? So that's peripheral vascular disease. You could have coronary artery disease. And then if the heart, just the same process as peripheral vascular disease, if the coronary arteries are 80% occluded with a stable atheroma, you're not going to have symptoms at rest necessarily, but when you go out and walk up 2 flights of steps and your heart is crying for more oxygen because it's pumping harder and faster, then you are going to have chest pain with activity, otherwise known as stable angina. And if you have the process going on with the blood vessel supplying your brain, then you may end up with a TIA. So you get the picture. So in all of these cases, you've got a stable plaque that is gradually encroaching on the vessel, and the body actually can usually compensate by growing collateral vessels over time. So this is a stable situation, and it's not life-threatening, no matter what organ is involved. The problem is when we get to the 4th phase, and here, let me erase some of this here. The 4th phase is called an unstable plaque. And what happens is we have this huge inflammatory stew down here. This is all inflamed. We've got cytokines, we've got macrophages, we've got neutrophils, and it's all contained and it's growing, yes, and it's slowly encroaching on the vessel, yes. But the big problem is if something damages the plaque, and this plaque opens up because of maybe hypertension, more smoking, chemicals that break down the endothelium, whatever. This fibrous plaque breaks, and this big inflammatory stew is suddenly open to all the inflammatory proteins that are part of the bloodstream that are always inactivated, and they all of a sudden become activated. We activate coagulation factors, we activate platelets, and we end up with this big clot starting to form. And the problem is, this big nasty clot that's forming can easily break off and float down into a smaller vessel. So this is called an unstable plaque, and this is the most dangerous situation. It's when the fibrous cap breaks, fibrous plaque rupture, releases the inflammatory mediators, the inflammatory mediators are in contact with the proteins in the blood that are usually inactive, that control coagulation and inflammation, and we end up with a big clot that forms that can quickly embolize. So this is what causes unstable situations. So we end up with unstable angina. We end up with other acute coronary syndromes.
Okay. Give me a sec. We'll talk about this.
Until you're working in you have no idea what
There's no idea. I never beat the chapter. I just printed out.
Yeah.
And then the side.
What's chapter?
They always have the answer. So then.
On what?
choose.
On yours? On yours and let me see.
Yeah.
Oh, let me see it.
See what?
The thing that you printed out.
Okay, I don't have it. That's about it. So everything was done for next week.
They never have Mr. Brown's tested too.
Okay, let's look at this right quick. I won't regurgitate the whole video. I just want to go over some key points to you. All right, because like I said, he does explain it well. It's this video, but this is already happening to you, by the way. Atherosclerosis, this process starts around age 2 when you start eating food. Okay, so this cell gets this little hook, right? It starts to snag what do you call these platelets, right? And then it starts to form this clot or inflammation. These low density lipoprotein. These are the bad ones. This is what's all in Bluebell. It's stacked full of them. Okay, is what makes it so yummy. All good food has these. All right. So all the good food that you eat, tasty food, it has those. Okay. So anyhow, so this begins here with the inflammation. Okay. So from the inflammation, you get these white blood cells. At some point in time in your pathway, not here, but in your medical pathway, you'll talk about the inflammation process. It's fascinating because we talk about, you know what inflammation is, right? Mm-hmm. Swelling. So, you know, if you trip, fall, twist your ankle, you get inflammation. There's a lot of processes in the body where inflammation is formed, okay, and it sends these mediators, these white blood cells up there to check it out. So it's because it's abnormal. So they run up there and they see what it is, okay? And then depending on what type of inflammation it is, that's how we're going to treat it, right? We won't get into that because I'd have to do a lot more studying and review again. But inflammation process is pretty fascinating. But it forms this inflammation process here. Okay, so I say this is taking place with everybody. It just depends on at what extent. Okay, again, sort of, not that I'm the one that should promote healthy eating by any chance, because I don't eat healthy, but you should eat healthy. That way this process won't happen to you. This VW factor, it starts, these are smoking, don't, if you don't smoke already, don't start. Okay, big factor as far as that. And then it forms this fatty streak. These LDLs form this fatty streak. It's just a different thing than the foam cells. A macrophage. It's cool. You can see it on YouTube. You can actually see a white blood. We watch it and hear that white blood cell go over and eat that, but a macrophage will go over and eat things, okay? But they're full of these foam cells now. I mean, they're full. They're big and fat and happy. So they're just adding to that inflammation process, okay? And then it forms this sort of this cap. Now, what's important here is that this is on the inside of the vessel. So, like the other picture, if you look at this, there's another wall there, which is going to tell you that you're going to have a decrease in blood flow. You'll get a little brewery right here. I don't know if that's the way you pronounce that, but anyway, you get a little slushy sound in your vessels. Have you ever seen a doctor or a nurse practitioner, whoever, PA, listen to somebody's neck with the stethoscope? Mm-hmm. They're listening to see if they can hear that shh sound in there. That means that the blood flow, that's an indication that there's some buildup there. That there could be this buildup here because this blood flow is having to go around it, and it causes this little turbulent sound like a blood pressure does. You know, you create this when you air up the blood pressure cuff, by the way, turbulent blood flow. Okay, so they can hear that in the neck. They do it especially before they do carotid sinus massage, or they're supposed to. The guy didn't do it in the ER that day, but not throwing stones at him, but he was trying to vagal this patient out by rubbing the carotids. okay, which causes a vagal response, but you're supposed to listen for that squishing sound. These things, these possible clots in the carotids. Remember, they can happen in any vessel. All right? I've had relatives that had like 70%, 100% blockage of the carotid arteries. If you have 70 to 100% block, especially 100% blockage of a carotid artery,
Won't be dead.
well, that patient's probably gonna have a what?
Stroke.
Stroke. Right? That's why we have two, by the way. So anyhow, you get this cap stable, correct? Everything's still stable here. There's no really signs and symptoms. This is, if this was in my heart, this is probably what I'd be talking. This is homemade vanilla right here, just packed full of homemade vanilla, right? Anyhow,
Bro, now I want some.
at least I'll go happy, right? So you get these foam cells. I want you to memorize the different phases. So phase 1, the inflammation. Phase 2, fatty streak. Okay. Phase 3, it provides this cap here. All right. And then when we get into phase 4, they get symptomatic. Remember, you remember stable angina, correct? And so now, as long as this patient is still sitting on the couch feeding his face full of homemade vanilla, there's no symptoms. When he goes out and tries to walk 18 holes, good luck with that. Starts walking and playing golf, then gets symptomatic. Right? Has to start taking that nitro, correct? A little bit evil. Okay, but this is stable. It's still considered stable. And then this unstable plaque takes place when it ruptures. There's things in here, all these things that he mentioned. I like the way he puts this stew, right? Because you know about stew. It has all kinds of stuff in it, right? But there's still things that are not supposed to be mixed together. So this stew of goo here that's underneath this cap, this cap grows and grows and grows, and then it ruptures into the vessel, and then it adds into the blood and the things in the vessels that's not supposed to be added to, okay? And then it forms an unstable plaque that can move. So this ruptures, now it forms another clot here, and that clot can move into a different vessel. It becomes an embolism, correct? Or it can. So that clot can move. If this is in the heart, then it's probably going to move somewhere in a coronary artery and cause a STEMI. Okay? If it's in the leg or something, it may move and cause a clot in the leg. Just don't give you a cold leg, right? Decreased circulation to the leg. It could move, depending on where it's at, it could move into a pulmonary vessel, causing what? Pulmonary embolism, right? Which is usually fatal. So a lot of things could happen when this takes place. But what it is, it becomes symptomatic. So it's unstable. Unstable. In the heart, since we're talking about cardiac physiology, you get unstable angina, where now this patient that is at rest is starting to have the chest pain. Right? Or when they're asleep, they start having chest pain. And they're awakened from the sleep. That's the time to go to the ER. Right? The stable angina, remember that patient's been educated that, hey, you're going to have this problem. So, when that takes place, when you're out there and you're walking those 18 holes, I don't know why in the world you would walk, but get a cart, okay? But while you're out there, you're doing some activity, then you may have to rest, right? Or you may have to rest and take some nitro. But it's still stable, so you're okay. And I think if I had multiple bouts of stable angina, then it might be a little time to call the the cardiologist back, right? But these guys are used to that. And so remember that stage 3 and 4 become symptomatic. That's important to understand. Now, let's give this some application, okay? So now you have this guy, you have Bubba come in, and you're Bubba's doctor, and he comes in, and Bubba's about 200 pounds overweight, smokes, is diabetic, okay? And it's time to educate the patient, correct? Nobody likes that, right? Nobody likes to be told, hey, you eat too much ice cream. You know, hey, you're a fatty, right? Nobody likes to hear that. But, I mean, America is one of the fattest nations in the world. We have more obese people in the United States than anywhere in the world. We are a very unhealthy nation, okay? But part of your responsibility, part of my responsibility even as a paramedic, is to educate patients. I need to educate you. So you sit down and this guy's coming to you with this chest pain. You need to tell him, hey, you're going to need to lose some weight. You're going to need to stop smoking. Okay? Put you on a diet that's going to promote healthy eating, like a diabetic diet or something. You're diabetic anyway, you go on the diabetic diet, you know. I mean, if you don't, then this is just going to continue to increase. The same way with the smoker, emphysema patient, right? You have to educate them on the dangers of smoking. Again, good luck with that. But why is that so hard? Let's say this person's maybe, I mean, this may seem old to you, but it's not. Maybe this patient's 40. Especially at your age. What can't you guys do very well? Oh yeah, no, not that. It's nothing against you. Every young person has the same disease. No, not that.
Same disease. Wait, so something that we all can't do?
You don't do. You can. You just don't. No, let me tell you. You guys are bagging on yourselves too much. What you don't do very well is look into the future.
Oh.
See, you guys at 17, 18 years old, you think I'm old.
We don't even know how old you are.
How old do you think I am?
54.
Hey!
Yeah. I don't know.
I was gonna say like late 40s.
Huh? I'm 57.
I was close.
Okay.
Okay, I said 50s
Now,
in my head.
even at the big 6-0, that is not that young. People are living long, healthy lives, right? Okay? But where you guys at your age, like I said, you all have the same diseases, you can't envision yourself at 40. Yeah, why would you want to do that? But you can't envision that. So all this stuff right here doesn't make you say, oh, that's never going to happen to me. Right? Because you can't envision yourself 20 years down the road. Everybody has the same disease. I had it the same way. I had the same disease. I just got over it. When I got 40, I'm going, wow. Okay? So, right? So, I mean, so do yourself a favor. Sort of think about this process, because this is a process that doesn't happen overnight. This is a process that takes a long period of time to take place. So I'm just putting the plug in now. Okay? Hey, if you're going to eat like there's no tomorrow, okay, at least exercise like there's no tomorrow. Do something active. Okay? I tell people all the time, I said, I eat what I want to eat because I work out so I can eat what I want to eat. Okay, I have a cup in there that says I work out so I can eat Bluebell. Right? You know. Anyhow, it was a gift. Someone gave it to me. But so the constitutes a gift, right? So think about that as you go forward. And it's hard for you to do. Okay? Those little booger eaters that came and you showed them around the class and this thing, they think you're old, by the way. You know? Oh yeah. They think that you are old age. Because they can't envision themselves that much further. But let me tell you, it's going to happen. So take care of this body as you can. All right. Enough bagging on you about your eating processes.
People aren't any better.
No, they're not. Okay, so as we talked about, I'll just write it on the board, okay? Because I want you to have a anastomosis. That was it. Okay, good. Anastomosis is the connection between two between two vessels. That the root of the aorta that we were talking about in EKG interpretation, where the coronary arteries are fed, that's in a anastomosis. Okay, that it's a little hole there where they're connected. Okay. Anyhow, let's look at this. Oh, wait. How did I get there?
It's Wednesday. That's why.
Okay.
Yeah. Feels like a Friday.
All right. The determinants of blood pressure, that threw me off a little bit. But anyway, so blood pressure is determined by cardiac output and atrial resistance. Okay, there's another law up there. This guy's name, don't worry about that too much. Okay, so when we look at cardiac output, we know that we look at heart rate, and then we look at stroke volume. Okay, so to determine stroke volume, okay, you take the end diastolic volume, or the volume that's left in the ventricle at the end of diastole, all right, and then venous return. This is venous return here. The end diastolic volume is the same. So if you want to increase cardiac output, you would increase stroke volume. Of course, if you had a bradycardia, you would increase heart rate, right, to increase stroke volume. But stroke volume, you can increase it by end systolic volume, or ejection fraction. I think we covered this the other day. Yeah, we sort of talked about that. Atrial resistance, or resistance, because you have liquid flowing through a vessel, the same as a water hose or a fire hose or whatever. When a water hose, there's water going through that hose, right? It creates a resistance or friction there as well. One thing that will cause a problem with pressure, determining pressure, is viscosity. What does that mean? They get the thick blood here. Okay, you can have it through the hematocrit. Okay, or concentration of blood flow, but that will also affect it. And then one big thing that we want to sort of focus on here, on this arterial resistance, is the radius. You can't see it because it's in blue, but the radius. That goes back to the disc laws, right? The radius of that vessel, or Darcy's law, it's 1 over r to the 4th. Not really concerned about that. What I want you to remember out of this is that blood pressure is determined by the radius of the vessel. Okay? So anything that we do to the radius of the vessel drastically affects pressure. Right? So in here we say nitro, right? We use nitroglycerin. Someone having that stable or unstable angina, we give them a nitro and it dilates their vessel. So when we dilate that vessel, we drastically affect the pressure. It can be very drastic. That's why during your patient assessment, you want to ask the patient, do you take nitro for one? You do all the allergy stuff and everything else. But have you ever had any bad side effects from taking nitro? I've had this happen. They say, oh yeah, it drops my pressure really bad. So I have to watch that. One, you drop a patient's pressure too quick and can give them a stroke. But two, you drop their blood pressure too quick, right? They get hypotensive. So if they're right on that border between, what's the minimum systolic pressure? 100, right? 90 to 100. So if they're like 102, 110 or something, they say, oh yeah, last time I took nitro, I had a drastic drop in pressure. Then you might want to reconsider that, correct? Mm-hmm. Think through. That's the definition of critical thinking. You just don't cookbook it, you think through it. Okay, this guy's pressure is at 102, I can give him the nitro because it says it in the book, right? But he's had a bad reaction to that nitro. So keep that in mind, that it does influence the vessel wall, influences the pressure drastically. And then again, a little algorithm here, right? Cardiac output is controlled by heart rate. Stroke volume is controlled by end diastolic pressure or venous return, or end systolic volume or ejection fraction. So we've already talked about how to increase ejection fraction, right? Okay. How to increase venous return. Remember that? We talked about that just last class, right? Okay, so over here, viscosity is one of the blanks that you have to fill in, but primarily I want you to think about the radius of the vessel. And this is this Darcy's law that they come back to. Not really that I want you to memorize the math part. Remember the little triangle means what? The change, right? Change in pressure over resistance, or the flow, the cardiac output. But as he puts it here, P1, the pressure on this end of this vessel, and then the pressure on that end of the vessel. Okay? So, not to get into the algebra part of it, okay? Because I would hate myself forever. But what I want you to remember here is this is the mean arterial pressure. The difference between P1 and P2 is the mean arterial pressure. Okay? And Darcy's law helps us measure this pressure between one point of a vessel and another point of a vessel. Okay? Good with that? And then these are just ways, like we sort of talked about already. So increase cardiac output, we can increase heart rate, we can increase venous return, we can increase contractility, which will increase ejection fraction, right? We can lower to increase pressure. We can increase the resistance by decreasing the radius. So we can maybe we want to give the patient a vasoconstrictor. What would this fit into here? You want to decrease the radius of the vessel. What pathophysiology have we talked about that you know about that you would want to do that?
When your blood pressure's low.
What event? I'll give you a hint. What event? Starts with an A. Anaphylaxis, right. anaphylaxis due to the anaphylactic reaction
Oh,
or
that's
anaphylactic shock, right?
The blood pressure decreases, so you have to.
Yeah, we want to give a vasoconstrictor here because the patient's not losing volume. Through the process of that allergic reaction, their vessels have dilated. So we want to give them a vasoconstrictor to constrict down the vessel. Very good, yeah. So we can do that. Decrease blood pressure. We could lower their heart rate, lower vascular resistance. For some reason, lower contractility. Okay, maybe the heart is overworking here, right? Okay. Increase radius. We could vasodilate. Okay. Matter of fact, we don't talk about it in here, but one of the frontline treatment for symptomatic hypertension. Remember, they don't treat asymptomatic hypertension anymore, really. Okay, but symptomatic hypertension, we give them a nitro. That's the first drug for someone that's symptomatic. That says that's symptomatic with high blood pressure. So we give them a nitro because it's always going to drop the pressure, right? Because it's a vasodilator, and we could go back if we were crazy enough to Darcy's law and figure it out, right? But I mean, it's going to drop the pressure. It will drop the pressure because it dilates the vessel. Remember, any change in the diameter of the vessel drastically affects the pressure. Okay. All right. So let me go over my notes right quick. Okay, so in this coronary artery disease, we have this. We have this breakdown. We have this acute coronary syndrome. Okay, like unstable chest pain or unstable angina, right? We get this part here where all sorts of plaques start. We get this goo. Let me go back to that picture. Here, we get this. This is what would be happens. This ruptures. This plaque ruptures. This thrombus takes place. Now we have this unstable angina. Okay, the first thing to remember about this is that you could get a possible function loss where the heart's not able to contract, right? Because if they're not getting oxygen, if this clot breaks out into a coronary artery and it's blocking off all blood flow, they're not getting oxygen, right? So we go into what kind of metabolism? Anaerobic metabolism, right? And if you remember the video, it only takes about 30 to 60 seconds to switch to anaerobic metabolism. Okay. The heart muscle itself, it sucks the oxygen out of the red blood cell. It is very efficient in pulling the oxygen out. It pulls about 75% of the oxygen out of this what's given. So if you're given, let's just put a number there. So if you're given 100, it pulls 75 out of the oxygen. Skeletal muscles doesn't do that. Okay. If you want to make $1 gazillion in life as an exercise physiologist, you figure out how to get skeletal muscles to pull more oxygen out. Okay? And you will make a lot of money. But the cardiac muscle pulls about 75. So you know there's a job there, like the exercise physiologist. All of these big super sports people have exercise physiologists that they work with. Okay, they figure out a way to maximize oxygen so they don't go into anaerobic metabolism in their muscles, right? They're like runners. You don't want the lactic acid buildup. Okay, so instead, it only pulls, once it starts going in this anaerobic metabolism, it only pulls about 10% of oxygen out of the muscle cells. You start getting the function loss depending on the movement of the electrolytes, the sodium-potassium pump. Okay, you might get electrolyte problems there, electrolyte disturbances. Okay, where there's not enough action potential in there to contract the muscle, so the muscles now are not contracting the way. Of course, we're talking about the heart, right? But the heart's not contracting the way it's supposed to, or the conduction. It's not conducting the way it should. So now you have that contractile cell that's not working correctly, and now you have that conducting cell that's not working correctly because of an electrolyte disturbance. And this all builds up to, I gotta hurry, lactic acid. Okay? 20 to 60 minutes. If you, after about 60 minutes, you have dead tissue. Okay? That's why when we're in the hospital and that STEMI comes in, man, they go straight to the cath lab, right? Mm-hmm. Because they only have a certain amount of time there that they need. If not, that tissue dies, then it scars. Dead tissue can't contract. Dead tissue can't conduct through there. It's like Death Valley. Nope, nothing goes through there. All right? I better stop.